A person's beliefs are rarely expressed simply as yes or no. Throughout Hollywood history, many artists have cherished their cultural roots but no longer adhere to traditional doctrines. Some openly declare themselves atheists, some maintain agnostic attitudes, while others simply oppose the authority of organized religion. This video looks back at the statements, experiences, and choices that shaped their thinking, demonstrating that spiritual life is far more complex than the public image often presents. Watch the entire video and let us know which perspective resonates with you most. Comment, like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on future content. The magic in Gene Wilder's performances did not equate to his viewing the world through supernatural explanations. On the contrary, behind the mischief and rich imagination on screen was a person with a sober, calm lifestyle who placed his faith in the kindness between people. Born into a Jewish family in Milwaukee under the name Jerome Silberman, Wilder maintained a connection to his cultural roots. However, he did not follow traditional religious dogmas. He once described himself as a combination of Jewish identity influences from Buddhist philosophy and atheism. This suggests that Wilder did not deny the cultural values that nurtured him, but he also did not believe that life was governed by a supreme being. Instead of seeking an absolute belief system, Wilder chose a very relatable principle: treat others with the respect you wish to receive yourself. This perspective did not appear only in words. After his wife Gilda Radner passed away from ovarian cancer, he spent many years supporting awareness initiatives, medical research, and patient support programs. Gene Wilder did not turn his skepticism into a confrontation with the faithful. He simply chose to place moral responsibility on human beings themselves. To him, compassion did not need to be proven through prayer, but was best expressed through practical actions for those in need. Before becoming one of Hollywood's most prominent faces, Ava Gardner was a girl who grew up amidst tobacco fields in North Carolina. Her family followed Baptist traditions, and the church held an important place in community life. But those very years also caused Gardner to question the true meaning of faith early on. When her father fell seriously ill, Gardner reached out to a local minister and asked him to visit her family. According to her memoir, the minister never showed up. This disappointment did not cause her to turn her back on all religious people, but it diminished her trust in an organization that her family once considered a sanctuary. After reaching adulthood, Gardner no longer participated in church life. She chose to build her own principles for life, not relying on dogma or community judgment. Notably, she also did not use her personal experiences to deny the choices of others. Documentation of Gardner's life shows that she respected differences in culture, origin, and beliefs. Hollywood often introduced Ava Gardner through her beauty and famous love stories. However, behind that image was a woman with independent thoughts who did not easily give her trust just because tradition demanded it. She judged people based on their sincerity and how they showed up in critical moments, rather than based on claims they made in public. Peter O'Toole could read formal lines with a powerful voice, but his own views on religion did not fit into any simple mold. He did not fully accept childhood teachings, yet he also did not deny all the moral values associated with Christian traditions. Raised in a Catholic environment, O'Toole gradually distanced himself from the church in adulthood. He was skeptical of institutions that demanded human obedience without allowing questions. For someone who dedicated most of their life to literature, theater, and history, faith only held meaning when it could withstand the verification of reason and practical experience. O'Toole once called himself a retired Christian. That humorous expression accurately reflects the complexity of his views. He no longer practiced religion within traditional frameworks, but still showed respect for Jesus and the teachings that promoted peace, tolerance, and moral responsibility. Therefore, Peter O'Toole's story was not a journey from faith to complete denial. It was the process of an individual separating what he considered valuable from rules he could no longer accept. He retained the humanist spirit while refusing to let any organization decide for him how to think about life. Katharine Hepburn did not need a major incident to change her perspective on religion. Her skepticism was formed naturally from a family environment that valued science, personal freedom, and social responsibility. Her father was a doctor, and her mother was an active campaigner for women's rights. In that home, children were encouraged to ask questions, defend their opinions, and not accept a concept just because it had existed for a long time. That upbringing became the foundation for the independent character Hepburn displayed in both her career and personal life. She openly identified as an atheist and did not believe in the afterlife. However, Hepburn never thought that not following a religion meant living without principles. She believed that humans could still build morality from reason, compassion, and a sense of responsibility for their own actions. This perspective was reflected in the way she lived. Hepburn did not try to satisfy social standards imposed on Hollywood women. She chose her roles, her dress style, and her private life based on her own judgment. At the same time, she supported many social activities and was recognized by the humanist community for her artistic contributions as well as her spirit of free thought. For Katharine Hepburn, the value of a belief did not lie in promises of a distant future. It lay in how a person treated others, used their abilities, and took responsibility for the life currently being lived. What do you think is the most admirable part of Katharine Hepburn's life philosophy? Please share your thoughts in the comment section. Click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories about Hollywood icons. George Carlin did not turn the stage into a place for final answers about the universe. He used it as an observation deck, where familiar words, social norms, and powerful figures could all be questioned. Religion became a prominent part of his material, but it was never separate from broader topics like politics, the media, and how people are persuaded by language. Carlin grew up in a Catholic environment in New York. However, the Corpus Christi school he attended was recalled as being quite progressive, no corporal punishment, co-ed, and students were encouraged to discuss. It was this education that allowed for questioning, which created an interesting paradox. He was raised in religion but simultaneously learned how not to accept everything mechanically. In a conversation with Larry King in 2001, Carlin clearly stated that he did not believe in God and viewed supernatural claims as things requiring evidence. Yet he did not want to label himself as an atheist according to a rigid definition. According to Carlin's own interpretation, asserting with certainty that there is no supreme being is still a form of belief. Therefore, a more accurate description is that he had no religious faith and was not particularly interested in choosing a philosophical label for himself. The harshness in Carlin's routine sometimes made audiences think he was always angry. He himself explained that it was dissatisfaction with what humans had created, exaggerated on stage to enhance humor. In real life, he affirmed that he was a cheerful person. This helps in viewing Carlin's legacy more balanced. He did not just mock religion, but used laughter to demand the audience examine language, power, and even the things they were accustomed to believing as obvious. In 1939, Marlene Dietrich became a U.S. citizen after refusing invitations to return and work for the Nazi regime. As the war spread, she did not just appear in fundraising programs. Dietrich also performed for Allied soldiers, participated in trips near combat zones, and recorded propaganda programs for the U.S. Office of Strategic Services. But Dietrich's skeptical view of religion did not start with World War II, as many stories often recount. She was raised in the Lutheran tradition in Germany and said she lost her faith during World War I. At that time, Dietrich was a teenager, hearing clergy from opposing nations all invoking God to support their side. That contradiction caused her to no longer see religion with the faith of childhood. By World War II, her most important choice did not lie in a philosophical statement, but was expressed through action. As an artist born in Germany, Dietrich publicly sided with those opposing Nazism. She used the very voice that had brought her fame to encourage soldiers and convey messages to listeners in Europe. Dietrich should not be reduced to the image of someone who abandoned faith because of a single moment. Her worldview was formed through two wars, the observation of how power uses religion and the political choices she personally made. She did not wait for an invisible power to decide history, but she also did not use her skepticism to deny the dignity of those with different beliefs. What she left behind most clearly is the spirit of self-responsibility for what is happening in the real world. A 1963 interview left a portrait quite different from the Frank Sinatra usually seen on stage. When asked if he believed in God, he did not choose a completely yes or no answer. Sinatra said he believed in people respected all forms of life and felt meaning in nature and what could be observed. If the concept of God was understood that way, he was willing to say he had faith. Sinatra's boundary lay in the concept of a personal God he could turn to for protection or luck. He did not accept that view. At the same time, Sinatra believed that religion was a private matter and that people did not necessarily have to rely on an organization or intermediary to approach spiritual life. His opposition was primarily directed at organized religion when it came with commercialism prejudice or the gap between preaching and behavior. In the same interview, Sinatra emphasized that kindness, love, and caring for others were more important than formal moral declarations. Therefore, his 1963 perspective was closer to personal spirituality than absolute atheism. Nor should those statements be seen as a fixed conclusion for Sinatra's entire life. His 1998 funeral was held as a mass at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. This detail shows that his later relationship with Catholicism was more complex than the image of someone who had completely broken away from religion. Frank Sinatra did not fit a single label. He was once skeptical of institutions, rejected the traditional image of a personal God, but still left open a broader understanding of God, and at the end of his life, he was sent off with Catholic rites. It is these very changes that truly reflect the heart of the story a person's faith can develop over time, and is not always encapsulated in a single statement. Do you agree that a person's faith should not be framed by a single remark? Leave your perspective in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can continue to explore true multi-dimensional stories about Hollywood legends with us. At the age of 91, Cloris Leachman appeared in I Can Only Imagine, a Christian-themed film. The fact that an actress who was publicly non-religious would participate in a work about faith could easily create a sense of contradiction. However, for Leachman, acting never meant that a character had to reflect the artist's personal views. In a 2018 interview with the Associated Press, she confirmed she was an atheist. Nevertheless, Leachman did not mock those who found support in religion. She admitted that religious spaces can help people meet, share, and feel like they belong to a community. That perspective shows she clearly distinguished between not believing and denying the right of others to believe. Leachman also did not build her career around theological debates. In nearly 9 decades of artistic activity, she took on many types of characters, from comedy and drama to stories with spiritual elements. She approached them with her ability to observe human nature, not requiring each role to align with her own worldview. Her long career was recognized with an Oscar and multiple Emmys, but she continued to accept roles well into her 90s. The notable point in Cloris Leachman's story doesn't lie in how strongly she rejected religion. It lies in her ability to maintain her personal views while still respecting the spiritual experiences of others. She didn't need to share a belief to understand why that belief could be important to the surrounding community. Humphrey Bogart often played men of few words who relied on no one and decided for themselves what was right and wrong. It is this image that has led many later articles to easily describe him as a steadfast atheist or agnostic. But when separating the cinematic character from the real person, the record of Bogart's beliefs isn't quite that clear. Bogart was born into a wealthy family in New York. His father followed the Presbyterian tradition, while his mother was Episcopal. He was raised in the Episcopal Church, but largely did not practice religion for most of his adult life. This is something that can be confirmed relatively clearly. Meanwhile, there are no credible public statements sufficient to affirm that he officially identified as an atheist. Therefore, a more accurate way to tell it is not to turn Bogart into a critic of religion. He simply lived quite separately from church activities and rarely brought his spiritual life into his public image. What the public knew better about him was his straightforwardness, his dislike of phoniness, his love for sailing, and how he valued the work of acting over stardom. Bogart's funeral was held at All Saints Episcopal Church, with music by Bach and Debussy, and director John Huston delivering the eulogy. This ceremony isn't enough to define his private beliefs, but it shows that the story shouldn't be reduced to an absolute label. Humphrey Bogart may have moved away from religious practice, but that is different from a public declaration denying all faith. In his case, accuracy sometimes lies in admitting that there are parts of his private life that the public never fully knew. Steve Allen didn't just read the Bible to find verses he agreed with. He read the entire text with the pen of a researcher, marking passages that were beautiful, confusing, and issues he felt needed to be questioned. Raised Catholic, Allen later left the church and identified as a secular humanist. However, he didn't see leaving the faith as a reason to stop studying religion. On the contrary, he spent many years examining the Bible's influence on history, morality, and American political life. In 1990, he published Steve Allen on the Bible, Religion and Morality. The book doesn't just question the accuracy or authority of certain scriptural passages. Allen also wanted readers to understand the text thoroughly before using it to pass judgment on others. He viewed the Bible as a profoundly influential work, containing both ideas to be cherished and parts he believed reflected the limitations of the people and the era that created them. What set Steve Allen apart was that he did not replace religious belief with contempt. He once acknowledged the good intentions and moral values present in many communities of faith. His opposition was primarily directed toward the use of Scripture as a tool of imposition, or the requirement for humans to accept a claim without the right to examine it. The host who helped shape late-night television ultimately brought the same spirit into his personal philosophy. When faced with an important question, observe, read carefully, and think before believing. For Allen, morality does not disappear when supernatural belief is gone. It transforms into human responsibility for the consequences of one's own choices. Richard Burton's voice could give the most formal lines of dialogue immense weight, but in the pages of his private diaries, the man who possessed that voice admitted that he could not find for himself a certain belief in God. Burton was born Richard Jenkins in a coal mining community in South Wales. Biographical sources describe him as being raised in the Presbyterian tradition. His youth was tied to Welsh chapel culture, but reading, studying literature, and observing the world gradually led him to a different perspective from his original religious foundation. Notably, Burton did not express his lack of belief in a triumphant tone. In his diaries, he once expressed a wish that he could believe in some form of deity, but his reason would not allow him to reach that conclusion. From this self-narrative, he can be seen as someone who did not believe but remained acutely aware of the appeal and comfort that faith can bring. Burton's diaries also show that he was more than just an actor living amidst fame. He was a well-read man, a keen observer, and often re-examined his own choices. Questions about humanity, time, and finiteness appeared alongside notes on stage film and daily life. Richard Burton, therefore, does not fit the image of someone who simply turned his back on religion to live freely. His story is closer to a dialogue that never ended. A part of him wanted an answer that transcended the material world, while his rational side could not accept what it could not believe to be true. Honesty with that contradiction gives Burton's perspective more depth than any single label. In your opinion, is it more precious to find a definitive answer or to be honest enough to keep asking questions? Please share your perspective in the comments section. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to follow more multidimensional stories behind cinematic icons. For Carl Reiner, cultural identity and religious belief were two concepts that did not necessarily have to go together. He was always proud of his Jewish roots, incorporating many of his family and community experiences into his art. But at the same time, he publicly identified as an atheist. Reiner once said that he was born Jewish and would pass away with that identity. However, what happened during the Holocaust made it impossible for him to continue believing that there was a supreme power watching over and protecting humanity. He questioned the silence in the face of the suffering of millions, then came to the conclusion that humanity must take responsibility for the world it creates. Although he no longer held supernatural faith, Reiner still cherished the moral principles associated with Jewish tradition. He did not see a lack of belief as a reason to live coldly or deny community values. On the contrary, he believed that morality is expressed through how humans treat their families, friends, and those they live with in society. That perspective was also present in his career. When creating The Dick Van Dyke Show, Reiner did not seek material from distant theories. He wrote about marriage, children, neighbors, and everyday situations that many families could recognize. According to him, laughter occurs when the artist speaks the truth about the human experience. Carl Reiner did not try to replace religion with a new system of dogma. He chose comedy, honesty, and kinship as his anchors. For him, the meaning of life did not lie in waiting for another world, but in the things humans can create for each other in the present. Charlie Chaplin once admitted that he was not a believer in the traditional sense. However, calling him someone who completely rejected all forms of faith also does not reflect the thoughts he recorded in his later years. In his memoir, Chaplin recounted a conversation with composer Sergei Rachmaninoff. When the topic of religion was mentioned, Chaplin said he did not believe in dogma. For him, religion was often associated with fixed belief systems, while art began with emotion, intuition, and the freedom of exploration. However, Chaplin's thoughts did not end with denial. He also wrote that he placed his faith in things humans cannot yet explain with reason, and suggested that, in a world not yet fully understood, there might exist a power directed toward goodness. He viewed faith in a broad sense as the starting point of many ideas, hypotheses, and discoveries, rather than just compliance with a religious organization. That complexity was clearly demonstrated in The Great Dictator. In the conclusion, Chaplin did not call on the audience to follow a sect or wait for outside intervention. He directed his words directly to human conscience, promoting freedom, kindness, cooperation, and the responsibility to protect one another. Therefore, Charlie Chaplin is better suited to the image of someone skeptical of dogma, but still leaving the door open to the unknown. He did not find answers in rigid rules. What he believed in most clearly was the human capacity to use compassion and creativity to make the world a better place. Thousands of interviews brought Larry King close to clergy scholars and spiritual leaders from many different traditions. He was always curious about why people believe, but the more questions he asked, the more King realized he could not make the transition from skepticism to faith. King grew up in a Jewish family in Brooklyn. His father died when he was young, and King later stated that event was one of the moments that caused his religious connection to decline. He also frequently questioned stories in the Bible and could not accept believing just because adults told him he had to. During many periods, King called himself an agnostic. Later, he said his views had leaned closer to atheism. However, that change did not cause him to deny his Jewish roots. King remained proud of his cultural identity, showing that a person can maintain a connection with their ancestral community without accepting traditional theological beliefs. What was special about Larry King was that he did not use his host's chair to win arguments. He continued to invite people of faith to talk, listening to their explanations and asking questions that he himself had not yet found satisfactory answers to. King did not pretend to be certain about things beyond his understanding. He saw curiosity as an independent value people can disagree but still sit across from each other and talk respectfully. To him, a sincere question is sometimes more meaningful than an accepted answer that has never undergone scrutiny. There is a detail that seems contradictory in Burt Lancaster's life. He was an avowed atheist, but once turned down a film because he felt the work portrayed Christianity in a way that was demeaning and lacked depth. Lancaster was born into a working-class Protestant family in East Harlem. As a child, he often attended a church associated with a local community center. A minister there once emphasized that people should not let prejudice control their reason. Lancaster moved away from religious belief as an adult, but that message against discrimination left a lasting influence on how he viewed society. By the late 1950s, MGM offered Lancaster the lead role in Ben-Hur for a very large fee. He still refused. Besides not liking the script, Lancaster felt the film simplified Christianity and turned religion into part of a commercial spectacle. This decision showed that he did not oppose a work simply because it had a theme of faith. What concerned him was how that theme was portrayed. Not long after Lancaster took on the role of a charismatic but dishonest evangelist in Elmer Gantry, the role earned him an Academy Award for Best Actor. The film did not deny people of faith, but focused on the danger that occurs when personal charisma, money, and power are shrouded in moral language. Off-screen, Lancaster participated in civil rights activities, supporting Martin Luther King Jr. and working with the American Civil Liberties Union. His biographer remarked that freedom almost became a secular religion for Lancaster. He did not place his faith in an invisible power, but believed strongly that individual dignity must be protected by concrete action and equal rights in real life. What do you see as the most memorable way Burt Lancaster turned his belief in freedom into specific choices in real life? Please leave your impressions so this conversation can continue. A like, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications is also a way to help these multidimensional stories about Hollywood reach more viewers. No pulpit was ever safe from Groucho Marx's sights, but religion was never the sole target of his laughter. Politics, money, social status, and rules considered inviolable all became comedic fodder. Behind his signature mustache and lightning-fast repartee was a man who read widely, loved to write, and was not easily swayed by any organization. The correspondence and personal papers he donated to the Library of Congress reveal that Groucho took literature seriously, even if he always masked that seriousness with his familiar, mocking demeanor. Coming from a Jewish family in New York, Groucho carried that cultural identity in his speech humor and social experiences. However, that did not mean he accepted traditional theological beliefs. In a conversation recorded by critic Roger Ebert, Groucho stated directly that he did not believe in religion or an afterlife. This is much clearer evidence than the jokes that are often taken out of context and mislabeled as his philosophical manifestos. Nevertheless, Groucho did not build his career as an anti-religious campaigner. He did something more familiar. He brought every figure of power down to the same level as the audience and examined whether they were truly worthy of respect. Great promises, formal rituals, and social prestige all lost their intimidating aura when viewed through the lens of his wit. Groucho Marx's worldview, therefore, does not need to be framed as a dramatic journey of renunciation. He simply did not believe in things for which he saw insufficient grounds to accept. Instead of speculating about an afterlife, he devoted his energy to books, the stage conversation, and the ability to make people laugh right here in the present life. His 1972 performance, An Evening with Groucho, was later added to the National Recording Registry, showing that his voice is still considered an important part of American culture. Many remember Gene Kelly in the moment he danced in the rain, but his philosophy of life was not formed in a world as bright as a musical film. Kelly grew up in Pittsburgh in a working-class Irish Catholic family. Religion, academics, sports, and dance classes were all familiar parts of his youth before the Broadway stage opened a new path for him. The turning point in Kelly's relationship with the church occurred in 1939. Biographical materials indicate that he disagreed with the support for Francisco Franco's forces during the Spanish Civil War. A trip to Mexico, where he witnessed the gap between the impoverished lives of the people and the wealth of religious institutions, only deepened that skepticism. Kelly subsequently left the church and identified as an agnostic, but Kelly did not turn that choice into a public confrontation. He shifted his focus to what he could directly create through his labor. In art, every movement must be practiced, every emotion must be expressed through the body, and no memorable scene appears by chance. His strong, relatable style took dance out of luxurious ballrooms, combining influences from ballet, sports, and street life to create the image of an ordinary man who could also express himself through choreography. Therefore, Gene Kelly's agnosticism should not be understood as a lack of spiritual value. He placed his faith in disciplined imagination and the ability of art to connect people from different backgrounds. Kelly did not need the audience to share his religious views. What he wanted them to feel was the joy created by real hard work by a body that had practiced persistently and by art that was for everyone, not just for a select class. Andy Rooney often started with something very small. A desk, a product label, or a strange habit in daily life. From there, he posed a series of questions that made the familiar suddenly become confusing. Rooney also applied this method to religion. He did not accept an assertion just because it had been passed down for a long time or agreed upon by many. Rooney served in the military and worked as a reporter in Europe during World War II. In a letter about religion featured in the collection Sincerely Andy Rooney, he remarked that if he had not returned from Normandy, the symbol on his military grave might have marked him as Christian or Jewish, while he himself did not belong to either. CBS also frankly described Rooney as non-religious. His stance was later expressed more clearly. In 2008, a program by the humanist community featured a live interview with Rooney about his atheistic views. In his writings, he argued that faith is often passed down to children by adults and the cultural environment, rather than appearing naturally as innate knowledge. He also did not believe that morality could only stem from religious dogma. However, Rooney's approach was not always cold denial. When Pope John Paul II passed away, he still acknowledged the respect that many people held for the Pope, and remarked that the relationships between religious communities in America had become more harmonious than before. This detail shows that Rooney may not have shared the faith, but still judged a person or a community based on their actual impact. Andy Rooney did not claim to possess the answer to all the big questions. What he opposed was people stopping to ask questions because an answer had been deemed sacred. During his more than 3 decades appearing at the end of the 60 Minutes program, he turned skepticism into a professional habit. Observe, closely, verify what is asserted, and be ready to admit when the evidence is not yet sufficient. Through each character, we can see that religious views are not always fixed throughout life. Some people change after an event, some reconsider after years of reading and observing, while others remain skeptical but still respect the beliefs of their community. These stories are not intended to create confrontational debates, but rather to offer a more cautious perspective on freedom of thought. Which journey impressed you the most? Comment, like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to continue following along.